The boom in the nation's housing prices recently has been so extraordinary that many first-time buyers are wondering if owning their own home is going to be beyond them forever. There's much discussion about whether cashed-up foreign buyers, along with record low interest rates and a short supply, are driving the inflated prices. There are calls from some quarters for higher tax rates or other restrictions on foreign investors so that Australian buyers aren't disadvantaged. Greg Hoy reports.
Super Saturday, as spring auctions sprang into action on the weekend. 1,500 Australian homes changed hands.
What? Wait! Third and final call! Sold! It's sold! It's sold! Going! Sold! Congratulations!
Rapid population growth and low interest rates are fueling strong demand. Tax incentives are encouraging tremendous investor interest, while foreign investment regulators seem comfortable with surging overseas demand for Australian homes.
The pricing is definitely going up at the moment, international money coming into the country, but I can tell you what, there's also a lot of Australian buyers also competing with those international buyers.
We're selling! Sold!
While the Treasurer and the Reserve Bank differ on whether a dangerous bubble may be building with rising house prices, the growth nationally is incredibly uneven. This graph charts rising home values in Australian capital cities since late 2008. In just 6 years, Melbourne and Sydney have climbed around 50%, leaving all other capitals well below.
The positive side of that is that those people that own property across Sydney and Melbourne have seen a very significant increase in the level of wealth. The downside, of course, is that we're starting to see more risk now in terms of investor concentrations around the Sydney and Melbourne marketplace, and potentially the likelihood that values will overshoot the mark and we may see a correction on the other side of it.
Speculation is building the Reserve Bank may change the rules to limit the number of buyers that can borrow more than 80% of the value of a home. Such measures were endorsed yesterday by the visiting head of the International Monetary Fund, Christine Lagarde, who encouraged the Reserve Bank to consider taking action to avoid a housing bubble bursting.
I believe that the Australian Central Bank, under the strong leadership of its governor, will be able to deal with it.
Tighter borrowing restrictions would make it even harder for first home buyers in Australia, but would have no effect on buyers from overseas.
What a great day to call an auction.
Under Foreign Investment Review Board regulations, it is illegal for foreign nationals to purchase existing Australian homes. There is growing concern the rules are being flagrantly flouted.
We're not police officers, we're estate agents getting the best price for our vendors.
The FIRB insists the number of overseas buyers is quite small.
It works out to be only about 4.5% of all Australian home sales have been to foreign buyers, but the risk in those numbers is that they're potentially being underreported due to the poor monitoring of foreign buying into Australia's marketplace.
We're on the market, don't have another one like it.
Let's say in Hong Kong, normal, starting price for the apartment, they said this poor people treasury start from 4 million Hong Kong already.
Which is
divided by services equivalent around 600K.
For an apartment?
An apartment, which is, I think, is only this half size.
Though he wouldn't give his name, this man bid at 3 auctions we know of on Saturday. He says he was helping friends in Australia buy a home, though he agrees there's considerable interest here from offshore investors in China.
They think Melbourne market is very reasonable price for them and they can affordable.
Where they buy, usually the market goes up considerably, anywhere between 10 to 15 to even to 20% above market.
Where's the money coming from?
Predominantly from China.
801 and a quarter.
I'd say that percentage-wise, if we were to sell 10 properties to offshore people, I'd say 70% would be owner-occupiers and 30% would be investors still living overseas.
Yes, no, maybe.
Auctioneer Lee Salchi says some homes snapped up by foreign buyers then sit empty.
And the buyer buys and they tell us they're moving in, and then we drive by 3 or 4 or 5 months later and there's no one in the home. we can't control that. It's sold. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your attendance. I wish you all a very fine weekend.
There needs to be a national register that means that I can answer the question how much of our residential retail market is actually owned by foreign investors. At the moment today, I can't give you that response.
Federal Liberal MP Kelly O'Dwyer chairs a parliamentary committee examining recent trends in foreign ownership and regulations that are meant to restrict it.
The evidence, though, is in that the Foreign Investment Review Board has not been doing its job properly. The Foreign Investment Review Board has not had one prosecution since 2006. They say that that is to do with the fact that people are being far more compliant. I think that defies credibility.
The chairman of the Foreign Investment Review Board wasn't available for interview, but has previously stated that with the resources given to it by government, the FIRB simply cannot police the 600,000 or so sale transactions each year. But ominously for the FIRB, that defence is simply unacceptable to some.
I do think it is an excuse, it's a bit of a cop-out for the Foreign Investment Review Board to say that it is all a matter of resources. I think it is also a matter of leadership and a matter of attitude.
While foreign ownership of existing homes is banned, it's perfectly legal for foreign investors to buy new dwellings in Australia. This policy has encouraged an explosion of apartment towers in Melbourne and Sydney. 50,000 apartments in Melbourne alone, with far more in the pipeline. Every one of these towers in central Melbourne, for example, is being developed by offshore companies for offshore investors. Not everyone is convinced it's a good thing.
There is a bubble in the production of small apartments in inner city areas, and I don't think there's any doubt that there will be a bust in that subsection of the housing market.
To address that fear and ease growing concerns about housing affordability, there is a strong expectation regulations will have to change.
In the US, for example, is the fact that foreign buyers do get taxed a lot more heavily than do local buyers. And I think that'll be one of the key findings, or one of the key recommendations coming down from the current inquiry that's underway from the Foreign Investment Review Board, is that there will be a higher tax associated with foreign buying, and there'll be stricter rules around the enforcement and the monitoring of foreign buying activity across Australia.
What's it worth? Start me where you like.
That's $400,000 now.
It's $750,000 on $1,145,000, madam. Sold.
Greg Hoy reporting.